Hello, everybody. Hope everyone is doing very well. First, let me introduce myself. If you don't know me, I'm a Term 4 student in SVU. I'm an honor student, active member of Honor Society. Right now, trying to help students with creating free videos for BSCE review. So I'm just trying to cover some of the material that I found high yield myself. In today's session, I'll keep it short. I'm going to cover some content from the first aid book. And then in the following sessions, I'll try to apply the content by doing more questions. So let's start on the curve that I know most of the students have probably forgotten the concept of it, but we'll go through it. And after that, if I have time, I'm going to cover the cardiac murmurs. For the sake of concentration, I'm going to stop my videos so that you can focus on the material. As you see, we are looking at the pressure time curve. This curve is showing us different pressures in different chambers of the heart, such as the aortic pressure in pink, the left ventricular pressure in purple, and the left atrial pressure on the green side. So we are basically looking at the left side of the heart, but as you know, on the right side of the heart, we also have the same changes and pressure changes happening as well when we go through either the systole or the diastole. So for example, in this curve, when we're talking about a point where mitral valve closes, you all know that at the same time, a tricuspid valve on the right side of the heart closes as well. So everything that we're applying here on the left side of the heart also applies to the right side of the heart. So I would like you to have that in your mind so that you know basically what is happening in the whole heart. So let's start from the first phase. As you know, first of all, as a quick review, as you know, on the left side of the heart, we have the mitral valve, which is the atrioventricular valve. And on the right side of the heart, we have the tricuspid valve. In terms of the vessels, we have the aortic valve, which is a bicuspid valve, and we have the tricuspid valve, which is the pulmonary valve that we basically have. So let's look at what happens in the left side of the heart as we go through the systole and diastole. The first phase that we are looking is the atrial systole. Atrial systole, as you know, it's a phase that the atrium is contracting. That's why we call it atrial systole. And as you know, when the atrium contracts, so the ventricular volume here shown on the red is a little bit increasing, which makes sense because the blood is going through from the atrium to the left ventricle. So the ventricular volume goes up. And you see that the curve in green, the left atrial pressure is also going up first and then comes down. First, it goes up because the atrium is contracting, so the pressure goes up, and then as the blood moves through the mitral valve to the left ventricle, we see that the left atrial pressure is coming down. And after we are finished with the atrial systole phase, the blood comes to the left ventricle, and this is the point that we have to start the ventricular systole. So in order for the ventricle to contract and for the blood to go through the aortic, through the aorta, basically, we have to close the mitral valve. As you know, the mitral valve has to be closed in order for the blood to be pushed from the left ventricle to the aorta. So as the mitral valve closes, we hear a sound which is called S1. So S1 sound is heard when the mitral valve closes. And as the mitral valve closes, you see that the left ventricular pressure is increasing. The purple curve is going up. This is obvious because the left ventricle is contracting. So if the left ventricle is contracting, the left ventricular pressure goes up to a point where the left ventricular pressure gets higher than the aortic pressure. The aortic pressure is shown in pink. So the moment that the left ventricular pressure is higher than the aortic pressure, we see that the aortic valve opens. And that's just because of the pressure difference. As you know, in order for us to open a valve, such as the aortic valve in this case, we need our ventricular pressure to be higher than the aortic pressure. So if you look at this point, you see that it's around 80 millimeter of mercury. That is the pressure that the left ventricle has to overcome. So the moment that the pressure is a little bit higher than 80, we can open the aortic valve. And here we see that the aortic valve opens and the blood goes through the aorta. The blood goes from the left ventricle to the aorta because we were able to open the aortic valve. So in the time between the time that we close the mitral valve until we open the aortic valve, that time interval, it's called isovolumetric contraction. So why this is called isovolumetric contraction? Because in this interval, as you see, the ventricular volume was the same. So the ventricular volume didn't change in the interval that the ventricle was trying to overcome the aortic pressure. That is why we call it isovolumetric contraction. Means that the left ventricle is contracting, but the volume of blood inside it is the same. And the reason that the volume is not changing is because the aortic valve is not open yet. In this interval, the aortic valve is not open yet. So the blood cannot go through anywhere. It stays in the ventricle until the ventricle is contracted enough to produce enough pressure to be able to open the aortic valve. And that is why we call it isovolumetric contraction. This is very important that you understand this phase. After the aortic valve opens, the blood goes through the aorta. First, we have the rapid ejection phase. That means the blood is going through the aorta, it's ejecting very rapidly. And at the end of the rapid ejection phase, you see that the pressure in the aorta is 120 mercury. So that means that's the systolic pressure that in a normal person, when you measure 120. That's basically the aortic pressure at the end of the rapid ejection phase that you are measuring. That's the highest amount of pressure of the blood in the aorta. And after that, the blood, we see the reduced ejection interval. Still, the blood is going through the aorta in this phase, but a little bit slower. That's why we call it reduced ejection. And as you see, the ventricular volume from the start of the time that the aortic valve opens is decreasing until the end of the ejection phase of the ventricle. So the blood volume is decreasing. So here we are done with the systole of the ventricle. Now, we want to start the diastole phase. So at the beginning of the diastole, as you know, the aortic valve has to close. So as the aortic valve closes, which is the beginning of the diastole, we can hear a sound called S2. S2 is heard in the early diastole during rapid ventricular filling phase. Rapid ventricular filling phase is the diastole phase, when the S2 sound is heard and the aortic valve closes and we hear an S2 sound. So, so when the aortic valve closes, the blood from the aorta has to go back now through the aorta and then through the systemic circulation. And from the systemic circulation, as you know, all the deoxygenated blood from the systemic circulation basically comes back to the right side of the heart, to the right atrium, and then right ventricle, and then from the right ventricle, it goes through the pulmonary artery to the lung. So what happens is that we close the aortic valve, and also at the same time, you know that in this phase, in the diastole phase, all the blood from the systemic circulation is coming back to the right atrium, and also the blood from the lung is coming from the pulmonary veins. Through the pulmonary veins, the blood is coming back to the left side of the heart, to the left atrium. So we are receiving blood to the left atrium from the pulmonary vein. So that's basically what is happening. Just wanted to explain you so that we know what we're talking about. So that's, we talked the aortic valve closed, we hear the S2 sound, and then we start the isovolumetric relaxation phase, which means that the ventricles are relaxing. And it's isovolumetric because, as you see, the volume is not changing. And the reason that the volume is not changing is that the aortic valve is closed and the mitral valve is still closed. We cannot receive any blood to the ventricle in this interval because the mitral valve is still closed. As the pressure in the left atria increases, as you see, the pressure in the left atria is increasing because we are receiving blood from, left atrial pressure. This is aortic pressure. So as you see, the left atrial pressure is a little bit increasing because we are receiving blood from the pulmonary veins. As you see here, when the pressure is high enough that can overcome the pressure of the left ventricle, now it's able to open the mitral valve. So why the mitral valve opens is because the left atrial pressure is able to overcome the left ventricular pressure. The moment that is higher, the left atrial pressure is higher than the left ventricular pressure because the left atria is receiving blood from pulmonary veins. and the blood pressure is high enough, then it's able to open the mitral valve, and it's here that the mitral valve opens. But still in the isovolumetric contraction in this interval, the mitral valve is still closed, and the aortic valve is also closed. So no blood can be entered into the ventricle. That is why we saw the isovolumetric relaxation phase. And the moment that the mitral valve opens, now the blood is able to come to the ventricle, and we see that the volume of the left ventricle, the blood is going up. So the blood volume is going up. So we see that there is the curve goes up. And in terms of the pressure, we see that the pressure is still, the left ventricular pressure is still coming down because, of course, the ventricle is on the diastole phase, so it's relaxing, even though there is blood coming through to it, but because it is relaxing, the pressure is still going down until it normalizes, basically. So in the rapid, we have the rapid ventricular filling phase and the reduced ventricular filling phase. In both of these phases, the ventricle is filling with blood. And basically, we are in the diastole phase. So just as a quick review, we saw that the moment that the mitral valve closed, which is at the same time that the tricuspid valve also closed. You know that the mitral valve and tricuspid valve in a healthy person, they should close at the same time. And when they close, we hear the S1 sound. And when the aortic valve closes, which is at the same time as when the pulmonary valve closes, we can basically hear the S2 sound. This is what we have. So now this graph should be pretty clear by now. I would like just to talk about a little bit about the S3 and S4 sound, what they are. So S3 sound is the early diastole sound, as you see here, is the early diastole sound, which means that you hear it in the rapid ventricular filling phase. It's a normal sound. It's not because of any pathology. It's a normal sound that can be heard in children, in young adults, in athletes, and also in people, in a person who is pregnant. And it's associated with increased filling pressure. So let me kind of clarify that for you a little bit. So for example, in a person who is pregnant, because the heart is bigger and the volume of the blood is higher in pregnant woman, the blood, as it's filling the ventricle, it hits the ventricular wall with a very fast rate, and that is why we hear the S3 sound. So just that is why we hear. So that is why here it says it's associated with increased filling pressure. And also we can see that in the young adults, in athletes, of course, because again, in athletes, the filling pressure is high. So as the blood hits the ventricular wall in the rapid ventricular filling phase, we can hear the S3 sound. However, S4 sound is not normal, is associated with pathology. Usually it's because of the hypertrophy of the ventricle. So there is a disease that you guys will go through it in term 4, but basically it's the name of it is hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. That's when the ventricle is hypertrophied, And because of the thickness of the ventricular wall, when the blood hits that wall, we can hear the S4 sound. So S4 sound is here. It can be heard in the late diastole phase. As you see here, the late diastole phase is basically the same as atrial systole. Just make sure to understand this, that the atrial systole is the same as the late diastolic phase. And we can see an atrial kick here. So it's due to the hypertrophy of the ventricle, and it's associated with a pathology. It's not normal. It's always considered abnormal. So that is it for the for this curve. I try to explain other contents in the following videos. Just stay updated and keep an eye for our following videos. I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you so much, and good luck with your BSCE exam.